voices during the interaction. So if everyone in the room is okay with that, we can record it, of course.
Yes, and the ones that don't want to be heard or recognized have a specific mouthpiece, like Bane in The Dark Knight. So it's all covered.
Okay, then I've started recording. Good. So thank you everyone for being at this meeting, and once again apologies for not being able to be there with you. I'm sure anyway that it will be a nice and interesting discussion, and especially the follow up in the design jam session. It's something that I personally haven't done by myself, but something that I've read and heard of a lot, and something that I'm personally interested in. So I hope that it will be really an interesting session for all of you. Feel free to interrupt me and ask questions, because that's the way Legal Hackers works. So the topic of today's meeting, it's regulation of drones. And it's a very hot topic, you know. It's high on the policy agenda of both European and international regulators. It's in the news almost every week, I would say so. And in most cases, we tend to refer these new gadgets with accidents. And that's why regulation is very important. But before we go to the question why we need to regulate drones, it is important to see where it all starts. And it all starts with the regulation of civil aviation. So why do we need to regulate aviation in general? Well, in this word cloud, you could possibly see the various interactions between the multiple components that we have interacting with each other in a modern aircraft and in the modern civil aviation chain. And it starts from the certification of the aircraft itself to the management of risks and the policy decisions related to air traffic control, and especially recently with the digitalization of aviation, the new risks coming from the participation of new players that are kind of alien to the traditional industry of aviation, and I'm referring to IT companies. So why do we need to regulate? We all know it's safety. And safety is important. It's the primary driver of any regulation in civil aviation. We go from civil aviation to drones because drones are essentially aircraft, and they are aircraft in the legal sense of the word, because the Magna Carta of the International Civil Aviation, the 1944 Chicago Convention, explicitly provides that pilotless aircraft are aircraft within the scope that fall within the scope of the convention. It is most of you would probably find it striking that the first version of this provision was drafted in 1919, so almost the beginning of the 20th century, and the notion of pilotless aircraft has been developing ever since. So it's a very old concept, and it's been there for quite a while. So one of the main reasons, yes, we need to regulate them as aircraft, but at the same time, drones are very different from what we're used to referring when we speak of aircraft. They're widely available; anyone can buy a drone, and that's one of the factors. A second factor is the commercialization and the success of drones, and the likely commercial potential that they reveal. But in this process of commercialization of drones, we have the interaction of two very alien to each other industries, namely the information communication technology industry and the conservative aviation industry. These two industries have essentially different safety mindset, because for a company engaged in building aircraft and aircraft components, safety is a first and top priority, and they've been there for a very long time working and improving this mindset. For a new company that can develop drones for software, like take any of the recent startups active in the field, this safety mindset is too distant, and the challenges stem furthermore from the potential of developing autonomous drones. So why is this an issue? Many of you would say, well, we already have aircraft that fly basically 95% of the time on autopilot. Yes, that's correct. But when we're referring to autonomous aircraft, we really mean aircraft that they do not need human supervision or control at during any stage of their flight. And that's something new to both to civil aviation and the ICT industry. And then,
are you referring to the type of drones that like Amazon would use to deliver packages?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, because
that's
the normal drones that you can buy in Carrefour or even whatever is a hobby shop. Normally they require a pilot, right?
Exactly, and we'll get to that because it's an important factor when we come to regulation of these types of drone that you can buy in a store, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, and then with the commercialization of drones come the risks, and that's where regulation kicks in, because we have a multitude of safety, privacy, and security risks. When we speak of safety risks, the most important risk is, of course, the risk of airborne collision or ground collision with property or people on the ground. And these two risks are not risks inherent to the drones industry, but rather they stem from the risk that the drones can pose to traditional manned aircraft. Then we have very specific privacy and security risks. The privacy risk, well, I think it is clear to all of us that you can basically fly a drone anywhere. You can put a camera on it, and it's not that expensive, and you can take photographs of basically whatever you want. And then the security risks, we've had some cases of, for example, smuggling drugs and weapons into prisons. There were a few such cases in the UK. And not to mention that you can overfly zones which are prohibited for overflight. And most of you probably know, air traffic controllers, and including both civil and military, cannot really see drones on their radars. So basically they don't know if a drone is flying in a controlled or even prohibited airspace. And then comes the second factor, which is the human factor, that is really the inexperienced pilots. You know, the civil aviation is governed by very strict licensing regimes for pilots, very cumbersome and very demanding. That's not the case for drone pilots. Anyone can buy a drone and anyone can fly it. And that's why this is a risk that none of the participants in the aviation value chain have considered or experienced so far. So it's something new and very cumbersome to deal with. So simply put, the IT crowd is the new kid on the block, and the traditional aviation industry does not know how to deal with it and how to make it behave properly. And then we go to something that you are likely to hear in the years to come, people speaking of drone law, but it's really, we can't really speak of drone law as such. We've got risks. and they come from various branches of law, but we can't speak of drone law as a distinct branch of law because we have issues stemming from safety. Some of them we touched upon. We have liability, very important because of the ground and their collision risk. Then we have insurance. You will, if you read the recently proposed regulation that I will discuss in a while, you will see that insurance is a mandatory requirement to make sure that that pilots can cover the cost of any are covered against the cost of any damages. And then we have the privacy and data protection issues like trespassing property, photographing people without their consent, and so on and so forth. And then finally, cybersecurity, because a drone could easily be turned into a weapon, and it's a challenging issue because cybersecurity is just now being considered an issue in civil aviation, and the interaction between manned aircraft and non-manned aircraft is yet to be studied, including the risks of data errors, spoofing, and so on. So if we have to summarize, we don't have drone law as such. Rather, we have a mixture of legal issues that some would attribute to an exotic domain of law called robot law, and I personally would consider to be part of the larger domain of air law, which has been around for quite some time. Here you can see a very simplistic overview of who is who in the drone industry. It's I say that it's simplistic because there are many other participants that have not been described, but these are the most important one. So first we have the regulators, and at the international level we have the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is tasked with the development of the international rules for drones, and that's the rules for drones that will be overflying many countries, so international flights. Then we have in Europe the European Aviation Safety Agency. It's the regulatory body that governs civil aviation, and it is now entrusted with the task of addressing the legal issues concerning the regulation of drones. Then on the second hand, we have manufacturers, and this is a very broad term when it comes to drones, because we have not only the manufacturer of the drone as such, the hardware components, but also the manufacturers of software, because this is also something new to civil aviation. So far, the majority of software in civil aviation comes as an embedded software on a component. And now we have multiple companies joining this nascent market of drone operations, offering software which you can easily upload on a drone that you can buy and repurpose it and reprogram it as you wish. As you can imagine, the majority of this software is not really certified according to the standards that civil aviation relies on, and logically that creates major issues and also risks for manufacturers, because manufacturers could be generally held liable for any defects in their products. And then we have the drone operators, which in many cases would be the same as drone pilots, because in the case where a typical consumer buys a drone from the market, you don't have a drone operator, you only have a pilot. And in this case, the pilot will assume also the responsibilities of the drone operator. So these two figures might coincide at some points. In a typical scenario, a drone operator would be a party that offers, for example, an aerodrome and offers flight drones for landing and renting, so that people can fly them and carry on both flights for recreational purposes or commercial purposes in the near future. Then we've got the airlines for which the inherent risk of collision and the important safety risks are very relevant because it concerns their liability. Airlines are liable for any type of accident unless they can prove that the accident has been caused either by a passenger on board, so contributory negligence, or that if they can exonerate themselves completely. But their liability is strict in the sense that they don't have to prove whether they've been at fault or not. They just have to pay a certain specified amount of money, which is determined by the Montreal Convention of 1991. And then we go to airline pilots, which are often frightened by and scared to death, I would even say, by drones, because they say, how are we going to spot them? How are we supposed to know that a drone is around the aircraft when the aircraft can't really tell us? The traffic collision avoidance system cannot detect drones and cannot issue a resolution advisory to a pilot in the cockpit. So they ask the relevant question of what do we do with it? And then we have the air traffic controllers, which often report that drones are their nightmare because they also can't see them on their radars, and they can't advise pilots on what to do with when encountering a nearby drone in the airspace that the traffic controller is managing. And finally, we have the general consumer. And in many cases, that will be also the ultimate pilot of the drone. But the implications of the drone industry for general consumers is far bigger than that of civil aviation when it first started in the beginning of the 20th century. So you can see that a century later we have aircraft accessible basically to anyone, and it creates both significant market opportunities and significant risks. So where do we stand in terms? Yes.
On the previous slide, when you say that the pilots are scared, if a drone is about 20 kilos and a Boeing 747 is like humongous, I have no idea how many tons that weighs.
Yeah, around.
What is the potentiality of a Boeing going down or crashing due to a mere drone?
It really depends on the impact, because the potentiality of a fatal accident may be not that big, really, the risk, but it really depends on where and how the impact occurs, because you can imagine the speed at which the Boeing would be cruising, and the kinetic energy that would be released in the event of an impact with a drone of even 20 kilos. I believe that the European Aviation Safety Agency had some estimations on this risk in their proposal. And yeah, I don't have the proposal with me now, but I believe that the risk was actually quite significant, even with drones that do not have that big takeoff mass.
Okay, I was just wondering. It looked disproportionate. The fact that you have a
drone that's something that most people tend to think, but the truth is that even the smallest impact could have catastrophic consequences on the structure of the aircraft.
Okay.
Yep. So where do we stand in the EU in terms of drone regulations? I already mentioned a few times the European Aviation Safety Agency, the major regulatory body. Its activity is governed by a basic regulation on common rules in the field of civil aviation. This is a regulation that is currently under review, and hopefully within the course of next year we will have a new updated version of this regulation, which also provides for a regulation of drones with a takeoff mass below 150 kilograms. Why 150 kilograms? Because up until now, with the current basic regulation, the European Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, has the right to regulate only unmanned aircraft with a takeoff mass of above 150 kilograms. You can imagine that the majority of commercially viable aircraft will have a takeoff mass of far less than 150 kilograms, which leads to the scarce and diverged approach between member states, because we don't have a single uniform approach at the European Union level. So we have regulations at national level, and this is also the case for Belgium. In Belgium, we have the Royal Decree on the use of remotely piloted aircraft in Belgian airspace. It's a very detailed and exhaustive piece of regulation, unfortunately very restrictive too, because currently it basically prohibits all commercially viable operations such as transportation of cargo and mail, spraying, towing of objects, and so on. So basically, unless you get a special derogation, which can only be issued after a lengthy procedure before the DGTA, it really suffocates the growing, the young and the nascent drone industry. That's why the European Aviation Safety Agency is in a hurry to promote rules that are European Union-wide and that govern in a substantive manner the operations of unmanned aircraft systems as they are officially known. So in May 2017, the agency published a proposal for regulation on UAS operations in the open and specific category, as they say it. What does that mean? Well, the regulation adopts a risk-based and proportionate approach that is organized around the concept of the operation. So we don't really care of what the takeoff mass of the aircraft is, although this is also a factor. But it is much more important as to know what the operator wants to do with this drone and what is the risk of this particular operation. So that's why three categories of drone operations are identified: the open, the specific, and the certified category. And what is of interest to most of you, probably, it's really the open category, because this is the mass market category of drones, the ones you can buy in a store, and the ones that most people would be flying and are actually currently flying. So some more specific requirements. There is a maximum takeoff mass requirement in the open category that should be less than 25 kilograms. Height above ground level, which should not exceed 120 meters. And the last criterion, the visual line of sight. Flights in the open category can only be pursued in within the visual line of sight. What does that mean? It means that the pilot must at all times be able to see the drone and to operate, to navigate it using visual means. So you should be literally able to just see the drone at all times. Then we have the second category, which is the specific category, that is governed by a stricter set of rules. We don't really have specific requirements as regards takeoff mass, height above ground level, and visual line of sight, because it is based on operational authorization that will be applied for before the National Civil Aviation Authority. So that in Belgium means that you will have to go to DGTA and ask for such operational authorization. The regulation suggests that a set of standard scenarios will be developed to make the process less burdensome for applicants. What does a standard scenario entail? For example, a standard scenario will be developed for delivery of goods or certain types of goods. So we may end up having a standard scenario for delivery of food, for example. And by adhering to that standard scenario, you will be able to say, okay, I am compliant with the requirements of the regulation. So you will save the trouble of obtaining a lengthy authorization based on safety risk assessment and other burdensome procedures. And something very important, because the question was asked in the very beginning of our talk, whether we can have autonomous flights for drones we can buy in a store. No, that's not the case. Autonomous and beyond visual line of sight, so flights where you operate the drone based on visual navigation and not like a camera, for example. These are only allowed in the specific category. You cannot fly autonomously a drone in the open category. So it is a logical choice because it is also linked to the greater responsibility that the operator and the pilot have to undertake. And then we have the third category, that is the certified category. It's not covered by this proposal for regulation, but EASA is also entrusted with the task of adopting rules. These rules will be adopted sometime in 2019, and to a large extent, they will follow the approach that we already have in manned aviation. So strict certification, licensing of the crew that will be flying the drones, and so on. So to a great extent, we will have a regime similar to the one we have for big commercial aircraft.
So would the last category also include the ones drones used by the military, or is that entirely a different category?
No, that's a good question. Actually, the drones used by the military, they're really outside the legal framework, even the international legal framework, because the Chicago Convention explicitly specifies that it does not apply to state aircraft. That's how generally aircraft used by the military and the state, for example, for policing purposes or firefighting purposes, customs purposes, and so on, any such kind of aircraft, and drone for that matter, fall out of the scope of the regulatory competencies. Although in the new basic regulation, there is a possibility for states, for member states, to opt in, so to join a regime which is also governed by this basic regulation for state aircraft. But that's, in my personal opinion, it's unlikely to happen, or at least not for all types of aircraft, and especially not for military. You can probably understand that the military would prefer to stay out of the of such conventional legal frameworks, because it allows them much greater flexibility.
Okay, but so if the police uses a novel drone which could be commercialized, but it just happens to be used by the police to monitor, for example, the visitors of Tomorrowland, that would be out of scope of this? Or?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Although this case is an easy one, but we have cases where it is very hard to distinguish between what is state aircraft and civil aircraft. So while in this case it's a relatively easy task to decide whether it's state aircraft or not, we have other cases where it's not so easy, especially when it comes to, for example, let's say a policeman using a drone, but outside his working hours, still, however, exercising his authority. It's an interesting question whether this will be a situation covered by a state aircraft or a situation which is governed by the rules of civil aviation.
Okay.
So it's not always a straightforward yes or no. And then we have the open category. The really the most relevant one for most of us. Within this category, we have 5 classes, and they are distinguished based on 3 main principles. So in the first class, class C0, we have flights that are taken over assemblies of people. In the second class, C1, we have flights that are taken close to people, as the regulation provides, and in the third category, we have flights that are undertaken far from people, and we have here the C3 and C4 categories. These are basically defined in terms of takeoff mass, in terms of how far from the crowd the pilot should fly the drone, and so on. This will be demonstrated in the next slide because we have the leaflet there. So there is an explanation in this leaflet of the various requirements for the different for the 5 different classes. But what is very interesting in this proposal for regulation is that the European Aviation Safety Agency, which is really a body typically entrusted with promoting safety, but safety mainly, is now adopting or suggesting, at least for now, a regulation which provides for quite burdensome regime on the operators of unmanned aircraft systems, drones. So the regulation says that operators must respect not only safety requirements, but also security, privacy, data protection, liability, insurance, and environmental protection regulation. As you can imagine, that's quite a lengthy set of obligations for a general consumer to know or to adhere to. So what EASA proposed is 2 main things. The first is that the technical compliance of the drone in the open category is the obligation of compliance with the regulation of the drone in the open category is put on the manufacturer. So a manufacturer must obtain certification. It's the CE marking we've all seen on consumer goods. So this involves a very wide set of regulations concerning consumer protection legislation, such as telecommunications directives, radio equipment directives, and so on. So the manufacturer must comply with all these. And in addition, we have visual tool, as EASA calls it, and that's the leaflet. So a manufacturer is obliged to include a leaflet in the package of the unmanned aircraft, which provides the rules of conduct as well as the main elements of this proposed regulation. So here you can see 5 very similar yet different sets of leaflets, and that these are leaflets for the 5 subcategories, 5 classes of operations within the open category. So a leaflet like that is expected to be shipped with every drone, and the average consumer is expected to be cognizant of these rules and to respect them. Now, it is...
So does the leaflet just have to be in the box? Because how am I going to prove that it was in the box?
Yes, that's a good question. The regulation does not really specify, but I assume that it should really be in the box, just like we get such leaflets, safety manuals, and so on with typical consumer goods that we buy, such as TVs or smartphones and so on. So I guess they are aiming for very similar regimes to the one we are used to with consumer goods that we buy on a daily basis.
Okay, so but you only see it after you've bought the drone.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't see it on the outside of the package.
Exactly, that's true. Now, this leaflet was developed in collaboration with a European project, Drone Rules. There is a website, drone-rules.eu, and within this project, the regulations of various member states in the EU were mapped and presented in a comprehensive and visually attractive manner. However, the regulation does not specify anything further than the leaflet. So I think it is reasonable to pose the question, do we really expect that an average consumer would buy a drone and would just unbox it and sit and read carefully and furthermore understand all the obligation that they are supposed to be compliant with? And I go back here because you see it's a very lengthy set of obligations. But the question of whether this will be the case in the regulation that will be finally adopted is still on the agenda of EASA and is still to be decided. That's just a proposal that they made. But in my personal opinion, we're better off if we adopt a different approach. So, for example, why not go for a smartphone application? People are, yes, probably some of you would object and say that, well, people, they install the application, but what are the chances that they will open it and read it? I think that chances are far better than expecting anyone to just read a lengthy leaflet, which might not always be with the language so clear and plain as for them to really comprehend their obligations. How do we do such a smartphone application? Because the next part of this meeting is the design jam session. We can use prototyping. There are various tools such as the Marvel app and the legal design toolbox. It's a project that is run by the Stanford Design School and the Stanford Law School, a joint project which aims at presenting law in a meaningful way so that anyone can understand it. And this link, the legal design toolbox, anyone can find accessible tools that they can use to really simplify concepts, to draw concepts, and to make things more accessible. And then for particular design ideas and inspiration, Canva and Infogramma, two platforms that are free to be for use and that offer, I would say, a very rich collection of leaflets, posters, and other resources that might be used as an inspiration. So that's a suggestion for anyone who's interested in legal design. It's a very interesting field to be in. So before embarking on the discussion and the ensuing jam session, I would like to just mention a few key steps of a user-centric design, as explained by Margaret Hagan. She's a designer and lawyer engaged in this Stanford project I mentioned, and she's been quite active in the field, and I would say that also very successful in developing and promoting the idea of legal design. So the first step is really to discover, to find what we are dealing with, what is the situation, what are the risks and the challenges. The second step of this design is to synthesize the ideas that we've gathered, to find the problem that we're dealing with, and in our case it will be, how do we make users really understand and read and find meaningful reading about their obligations when it comes to flying drones. Then the third step, it is to really build prototype, and I believe, I'm not sure if we'll get there this evening, because it is a lengthy process, and it's not always that straightforward, of course, to prototype and to come up with a solution. And then, of course, the test involving the step involving testing of the solution, because without live testing, you can never know if it works or not, if it flies or not, literally. And then, of course, following up on this and not just leaving it like an app in the App Store that's not been updated for ages. And this is really the design process in few simple steps. So where are we now in this design process? We've already chosen a problem area, and that's drones regulations and in the open category. We've done some user research. We know that our consumer is generally a hobbyist who is interested in just flying drones for recreational purposes, taking photographs, and so on. We already have a list of the guiding personas, so to speak, the main actors that are involved. And in our case, we have a multiple set of actors in the aviation chain, even though for the open category, the impact on many of them will be significantly less than if you compare it to the specific or certified category. And then we have what we need to do now is really brainstorm solutions and go to probably prototyping low-fi. That's really coming up with ideas on how do we see the solution in a smartphone application? Is there an alternative way? And how do we really engage users to make sure that in the end we are all safe when flying, both in a commercial aircraft and when flying a drone you can buy in the store. And that's it. Basically, I'm available for questions.
Yeah. Why are we just looking at a leaflet or an app? Why wouldn't you like have a sort of like forced view video, which could be like also 50 or 60 seconds, but has the same messages, perhaps even more with a bigger impact on the user. So, for example, you say if you buy a drone, you have to register the drone, which would not probably be a very bad idea. And if you register it, you add an email address or you open up an account wherever in that registrar office, and there you're like before you can actually manipulate the drone, you have to watch the video.
Yeah, that's also a possible solution, and probably a more engaging one for a user. You're right, because a user is more likely to watch a video than scroll through an app or let alone read a paper. Yeah, video is a potential solution, and especially given the fact that we have a mandatory registration regime for any drone that is with takeoff mass above 250 grams. So basically, the majority of drones will be under a registration regime.
Okay. Oh, I was actually just thinking about some board games you can register if you want, and then you get you can have the rule book in different languages and stuff like that. That's just so if you register, you have the advantage of having some additional materials, and so that's where the idea came from. So, because they also post official explanations of how to play the board game in a video that you can use, and afterwards, obviously, they leak to YouTube, but that's where you get them first.
Yeah, exactly. The process of registration, a video or some interactive material like that requires you to go through it before you can actually register the drone. Is probably a good idea. In fact, with the regime of registration, things are still in the in the dark, because what the regulation says is okay, you have to register a drone with takeoff mass above 250 grams, but how do we do that? Will it be managed at a European level, like centrally? Who will manage it? These are questions that we still don't have the answer to.
Or you could easily combine it with the warranty, because often you need to go on a website to register the warranty for a longer period of time than the electronic one. So you have like 30 days or something to register. So maybe you combine the obligation to register the warranty of the trust with the registration so that you can do one without the other.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it very well.
Yeah, it's not a professional mic. It's just my Macintosh. So.
Yeah, I guess that's why. But no, it's not a problem. You don't have to repeat it if it's fine. So what do the people of the audience think about the possible solutions? Because actually EASA recently closed their public consultation, but I'm not sure the process is over, because they are aiming for adopting a final version of the regulation by the end of this year. They actually announced that at a conference last week in Brussels. But I very much doubted that the process will go so smoothly and so quickly through the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament. So I guess that, and it's really a work in progress. They're really looking for contributions from all sides engaged. So any ideas would probably be welcome.
Well, maybe there are several tracks that could be followed. You mentioned before that a drone could be assimilated to a weapon.
Yep.
So on the other side, drones are actually using, I would say, phone-like or computer-like frequencies, the wireless frequencies. So maybe it could be a combination of what happens now if you want to buy a phone. You have to give your coordinates if you want to get the number, I think. At least in Belgium. And on the other side, of course, especially in Belgium, buying a gun, you really need a good reason, especially a good permit to be a hunter or a professional shooter. Maybe we could try to find some common language between those different approaches. And reverting to the phone comparison, perhaps, I don't know to what extent to start with the lobbying about the phone manufacturer is how powerful they are, but maybe you could make mandatory to link a drone with a phone number, for instance. Since phone numbers are now identified, mostly, this could be a good way to, well, at least, because it all seems so wishful thinking so far. People will read the notice, they will register the drone. I mean, it's all nice and well, but are people so, I would say, inclined to comply to such demands? I'm not sure of that.
If they want to commit a crime with it, for sure they won't register.
Well, even if they're not staying here, maybe you just want to fly under the radar. No much incentives, but it's exactly that. You have a drone, for instance, I had one for years. I haven't thought about registering it because I'm not using it often enough. You see? I don't see why I would draw attention on it so far. And it's purely for private use, so no influence considered so far too. It's unclear.
So linking it to the registration wouldn't make much sense because you lose part of the population.
I don't see the advantage of registering. What's in it for me? I speak for me, but it could be for any user. So on the other hand, well, it could be made compulsory indeed to associate it. I don't know why. To be able to buy a drone, since it's usually in the same kind of shops as for phones, mostly, more or less, would be the same. that you have to provide credentials in order to be able to get one. Or even further.
So you do it in the shop already, rather than doing it at home.
It could be in the shop, or in order to activate, that could be very easy to put some kind of activation code.
Yeah, but making hardware tamper-proof is harder than doing it at.
Okay, but it's the same for phones. You can jailbreak it for an iPhone, of course, but let's say for the vast majority of people, it should be secure enough. And then, of course, to activate the phone, you need to enter a phone number. Something like that.
So you need the registration number to be entered in the drone
For instance, and then you get an SMS for a central provider, and you can start. Like with most apps, most identification apps that you are using for, I don't know, financial purposes or even crypto apps, etc. There are several ID possibilities, but they all imply that you click somewhere.
Yeah, this idea about the activation code was also discussed at the international level in the remotely piloted aircraft systems panel of the International Civil Aviation Organization, and it's one of the possible solutions that are currently being discussed. I don't know. It's really it's interesting because basically the fact that anyone can buy a drone and can easily repurpose it can render void the whole idea of registering a drone. So if you really want to do harm and to commit a crime with a drone, you will probably have the skills to really change it to repurpose it to upload new software on it and make it fly and do stuff. So I often like referring to drones as the uncharted territory of geeks, because it's really giving like the power of flying into the hands of people who just don't have the safety culture of the people engaged in traditional aviation.
But maybe that's the first question I have, and I really don't understand how easy it is to buy a drone on the internet. In Belgium, for instance, you can't advertise weapons, but even I would say knives and these kind of things. There is a gray zone. You certainly can't advertise street animals, for instance, young puppies, etc. You can't buy tobacco online. You can buy a pipe or whatever, but you can't buy tobacco, but you can buy drones. How come? I speak about Belgium, of course, there are different laws in different countries, but why is it so easy to buy drones? Is the lobby behind it so powerful? I don't think so, because those are not so huge companies. Mostly they don't do that. How come? Is there a beginning of an answer on this? Because I have the impression we are trying to tackle a problem that could be actually eliminating the problem would be the solution. And it's a hardware solution.
It could well be. Well, the question of why we can easily buy a drone on the market, it's one that I personally don't have an answer to, but I spoke with a guy from DJI, the largest, the biggest drone manufacturer worldwide, and they seem to pretty much rely on the consumer market. They're really into it. They're investing heavily, and they really want to attract consumers to. I mean, by consumers, general consumers like you and me, just a person going and buying a drone. So there's certainly, I guess, a lobby behind this. But as you say, the problem might just as well be the solution. If the thing is that I don't think there's an attitude to really restrict access to drones, because the current proposal for regulation of EASA is going to the opposite direction. In fact, many of us in the area found it a bit striking that they went so easily for allowing autonomous flights in the specific category. Because, for example, Belgium, in Belgium we have explicit prohibition of autonomous flights. So that was something new and interesting, and they explained it with their desire to really enable the market, because they know that if they don't do it now, then they'll probably lose it to the US, as it has happened many times. And that certainly doesn't guarantee that it won't happen again, but I would say that they're trying very hard to do it, and that's why a more enabling regime is likely to persist in the next iterations of this text.
Now that you mentioned the US, would owning a drone be considered to be under the Second Amendment?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
It's a very stupid question, but it's just, if we compare drones to weapons, could I argue before an American court that the American government can't prohibit me having a drone, just like it can't prohibit me having a gun?
That's a very interesting question, and admittedly, I haven't thought about that. But probably, if you can prove that the drone is a weapon, that falls under the understanding of the court of what a weapon is. I don't know, but I assume there is case law on this as to what is and what is not a weapon. Then yes, I don't see a problem with that in principle, even though it would be a very interesting case.
I just get the idea because I've been looking at briefly at the Hack Back Act or bill in the US, and there they more or less use, or some use, the Second Amendment also to defend that one. So I was thinking, well, if they can defend hacking back, so hacking is considered to be a weapon, why wouldn't drones be a weapon?
Yeah, indeed, you're right. It makes sense. If you're able to use it as a defense, then why wouldn't it be a weapon? Yeah.
Very strange. So
Send it to the.
let's see if they know. That would be great. Didn't forget. So you think, according to you, macro politics makes EASA decide, let's not be too strict because otherwise we may lose the market.
Definitely. They even said it quite explicitly. I was surprised to hear that from agency, and it means from a regulatory body, going so explicit about the fact that yes, we need to. This is really the last train for us, literally. We need to catch it because otherwise we are losing this market to the US. They were very open about that, and in fact, it's very interesting that their initiatives are not isolated and are very much supported by DG Move, the Directorate General, the European Commission, responsible for the transport policy. So all their proposals and efforts are thoroughly coordinated with DG Move, which in their view and in their common position means that we should be able to see really the final text of this regulation by the end of this year. But as I said, I'm very skeptical about that. If not for anything else, for the fact that this regulation is based on the basic regulation and on the basic regulation in its amended version. And I don't see how you can adopt a regulation based on a regulation that's not yet adopted. And the basic regulation is not expected to see the day of light before mid-2018. So I think that that's a more realistic term for adoption of final rules. But yeah, they think the sooner the better.
So we're looking at the leaflet now from the European governmental bodies, but are there similar exercises being done in specific countries, Norway or whatever?
None that I know of. Actually, I think this is, to the best of my knowledge, of course, but I think this is really the first attempt to do anything like that. No, I don't. I haven't. At least I haven't heard of any such attempts.
All right.
When you push a legislation, usually you are supposed to implement kind of cohesive middle. Means, I mean, so punishment by the, so to say. Is there anything on the table yet? Because of course, again, if we want to go further than or beyond the wishful thinking or the people are nice and they will comply, well, there needs to be some kind of risk. If you are caught flying a drone without any insurance, especially an unregistered one, and etc., what happens? Because people are people, and I suppose as long as they feel free to do whatever they like, well, they will do it.
Can I have a question again, because I didn't quite get it? It's I don't hear it so well.
And I think I'll try to more or less paraphrase.
Okay.
In terms of enforcement, do we have to take, if we want to do the exercise, do we have to take into account some enforcement measures that are already included in the text or foreseen by the text? Would it be criminal sanctions, something with regard to liability, the warranty, whatever?
Well, in the text, we don't really have provisions on like on liability or on law enforcement provision, and the reason is that these are mostly competencies of national member states. So, for example, the regime of liability is national one. It's different for Belgium. It's different for Poland or Germany. So, in these specific rules, we can't really cover. We can only refer to, like, say, please check your national legislation, and that's actually a problem because it's, once again, you can't expect the average consumer to just go and check the law, even though, yes, lack of knowledge about the law does not excuse anyone. Yet many people just don't know about it and wouldn't even bother trying to learn about it. So whether and how this will be dealt with at national level, it's unclear. The proposal does not say anything about that, really, and it doesn't even provide for the option for member states to modify this leaflet in accordance with their national law. The idea is that you will have a standardized leaflet in all member states. But yes, that's a reasonable question. What do we do with issues that are specific to the national law? Because liability and law enforcement, and criminal sanctions, these are questions that are within member states' competencies. It's not the case, or at least it won't be the case as of 2018 for privacy and data protection. But yet, even in the GDPR, member states can deviate from some of its provisions. So how this issue will be addressed, it's a difficult question.
But on a practical level, you should be one step earlier, because if you have a drone but you don't know who it belongs to, even if you catch the drone, because the drone by definition will not be right next to the person who's flying it. So you will still need to be able to identify the person if you want to have any sort of punishment, whether it's criminal or civil. And if they don't have to link it, then you just never know whose drone it is.
Yeah.
But even if they have to link it, they just take somebody from the street, have them buy it from him at double the price with black money. And again, it's free drone. You have to think like a criminal. If they want to if I want to kill somebody with a drone, I'm going to make sure that there's no attachment of that drone registration to me.
But then it really has to work like cars, with the matriculation plate and yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
And then you have the same problems, but at least it's,
The difference is that a car you can see immediately if there is a plate on it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Even, well, with a drone, well, you first need to spot the drone to start with. So,
But a drone never has to contact any other system, because maybe the drone technically had, before starting to fly, had to sort of send a signal and then receive a response. But it can run on its own. So, but you could technically insert that into the design of the drone, that it would need to send a sort of I'm here, can I fly? And then sort of automatically fly, and then it's actually on the road.
I thought there were some technical things like that for airplanes, but probably the beacons that they use are far and wide apart. So I don't really think that you could reuse
you have a point, because airplanes, as now ships, use transponders.
Yeah.
Which, of course, it would be a nightmare because of the thousands of drones, but still, that may be some kind of we could have. And with now, indeed, with the transponder, we could organize the transponder to be acknowledged and then allow the drone to fly. That could be something.
Is there a SIM card in the drone? No.
no.
Well, there is an SD.
There could be, but
Not necessarily.
yeah.
The only thing that the drone connects with is the GPS satellite, but it's passive.
Yeah.
You see,
But you have that, for example, for cars, that you can have a sort of capture on the road that will then interact. And as soon as a car passes through that capture, then so you could, but I don't know how you would put that in the sky, and then you would install it on the drone, then you would automatically know, because I know to some extent they have to implement some geofencing, at least for a sensitive area. So you could do the other way around, a laser departure.
Actually, geofencing and electronic identification are mandatory requirements of the regulation, even though they don't specify how they should be implemented, what technology should be used, what standards should be adhered to, because truth is we don't have these standards yet, and it's not yet clear. But it is interesting to note that member states are allowed to define zones, special zones, prohibited zones. So they may use them both to prohibit flights and also to create an enabling environment by saying, hey, the airspace over this and this neighborhood, for example, is open for drone flights, so you can go fly your drone there. And it's really up to the member states in this regard. But geofencing and electronic identification are really mandatory. Especially for for drones that have camera of 5 megapixels or more, or drones which are equipped with audio sensor or other sensor capable of recording personal data. This requirement is mandatory. To me, the criterion of 5 megapixels is a bit arbitrary. I mean, it could have easily been 3 as well. Not to mention that it's not really clear how exactly this electronic identification system would work. But in any case, it is in the regulation. It is seen as a privacy preserving measure. So a lot of attention will be paid to it. That's for sure.
And so, in terms of enforcement, this regulation for drones would be separate or parallel to the GDPR. So if I use a camera on my drone, I would have to apply both.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my criticism to this regulation. I haven't heard anyone raising it so far. Probably there are some colleagues thinking about that, but I think that EASA is actually overstepping its competencies in this regard. I don't think really it's their task to deal with privacy and data protection. It's not really within their domain. It's not something they typically address. And there was a workshop in Cologne in Germany in July, and a person of the audience asked the representative of the agency to explain why exactly they think they should be dealing with privacy and data protection in a regulation that aims to deal mostly with safety aspects. And their answer was a curious one. They said that the purpose of these provisions is really to raise awareness. And because we have now the hype of data protection and privacy all around Europe, they found it a good idea to have some provisions in this respect. But I personally find that explanation a bit implausible because it just doesn't make sense. And the criteria adopted, especially for the camera, seem quite arbitrary and not really well thought. And the truth is that they didn't really have a good explanation as to why exactly they're dealing with data protection and privacy.
Who is actually issuing the legislation? Is it the EASA itself, or does it actually still have to pass Parliament and the Council? And
yes, it still has to pass the procedure. I think that, in fact, I'm not sure how exactly it will be conceived in the end. It might be an implementing regulation that the Commission itself will adopt, and I think that will actually be the case, even though it's not mentioned in the proposal itself. But yes, I have the feeling that it will be an implementing regulation under the hood of the basic regulation. So the basic regulation will go through the trialogue procedure, and then we will have this one as an implementing regulation adopted by the Commission. So it won't have to go the cumbersome process like the basic regulation of agreement, but still it is open to challenges, and I wouldn't exclude that we'll see cases probably based on the arbitrariness of these criteria. There are also some other privacy-related concerns. For example, the explicit provision of a follow me mode. So that's a mode that enables basically you to set a drone so that it can follow a person whenever they go. I didn't see any proportionality analysis of this measure, so I assume that unless it is corrected in the final draft, this will create some tension.
About the specific mode, I think you need a device, be it a phone or anything, on the person for the drone to be able to follow it. We are not yet to the facial recognition, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
But that's okay, it can happen. Yeah.
it could be dropped in a pocket.
Dropped in the pocket,
like in movies. I get it.
But still, I'd like to refer back to the old days, because years ago, before the drones even existed, there was this radio-controlled aircraft or boats, etc., that were actually very severely regulated. You couldn't fly an aircraft with a radio, but of course, it was not wireless, it was a radio controlled with radio frequencies. And you had to have special places to do it, you had to have special frequency slots, etc. It was much more heavily regulated, I think. So I'm still surprised that even at European level we are so free now to try things that can be potentially much more lethal. Because they fly by themselves, so you can get them almost everywhere without crashing, which was not the case at the time. How come that it changed altogether from it's almost 180 degrees? Now everything is allowed, whereas at the time it was actually very
Yeah, but I couldn't hear well the comparison. So we're comparing drones to what?
Radio-controlled aircraft.
To radio-controlled aircraft. Yes. Yes, you're
Which
right.
were actually much more regulated when they were in the only thing that could fly with a remote control, of course. And now all of a sudden, drones seems to be you can do almost whatever you like. How come?
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. But well, I guess that it's really the fact that most of these radio-controlled aircraft were used really for modelism, for aero modelism, not really for the commercial applications that we now foresee for drones.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's one of the reasons why EASA wants to see a more relaxed regime. But of course, it comes at the price of dealing with new safety, security, and privacy risks. It's an inevitable consequence. But I think that probably this is part of the explanation as to why we have a more relaxed regime now than compared to the radio-controlled aircraft. Apart from that, yeah, I agree. You're right. You're absolutely right about that.
And is there, because I haven't studied this by any means, is there like any pushback from the national legislators that have already legislated on drones, and probably more strict than on the European level, where they indicate, well, if Europe goes that way, we're gonna fight it in some way?
Well, it's a tough question. The ultimate goal is that we have a common set of rules applicable in all member states. So you buy a drone here, you go fly it in Germany, you go fly it in Spain, it's all the same. Yes, member states will have some discretion. For example, in determining zones, like I said, prohibited zones or zones enabled for testing and so on. But what is the level of harmonization? Really, it's a regulation. So a regulation is directly applicable. Member states can only legislate where the regulation provides so. But we should not forget that this whole piece of legislation, including the basic regulation, is adopted under the hood of the transport competence of the European Union. And the competences of the EU in transport are shared with the member states. What does that mean? It means that as long as the European Union has not legislated on a particular matter, it is the member states which can adopt national legislation. So now that the EASA is taking up these competences, I think that there will be very little left for the member states to legislate. And it is in fact one of the problems that was raised during the discussion last week in Brussels, that if we don't do it right, if we don't get this regulation right, member states might face strong criticism on the part of their citizens and businesses also as to, well, what are we doing? And will member states say, well, that's what the EU says, and there's nothing we can do really about it. So it's really a matter of consensus between all parties, however hard it is, given the current state of affairs in the EU.
No, it was quite interesting. So, what timeline do you see before us? Will it stay in some kind of gray zone or land? Or can we expect in the near future a much more stronger position? from the EU and then from the countries?
Well, my expectation is that they will push very hard for this, and it is likely that we will have the regulation adopted sometime in 2018, possibly together with the revised basic regulation, and then it will take them some time to develop the standard scenarios in the specific category, but that's not so relevant to the average consumer. It should not, in principle, be so hard for manufacturers to comply with the requirements, because it is really the consumer safety legislation that is applicable to all electrical appliances, basically. Even though it's a very extensive set of obligations. But I believe that most companies are prepared, and to a great extent are already complying with many of these regulations. So in my view, in 2018 we'll have this regulation, and then the next steps will be to see how it will go on at national level, what member states will do, given the competences that they will be provided by this regulation, which are not that many, but still, because if you can imagine that if a national member state decides to prohibit the majority of its airspace for drones, it will effectively prohibit the commercialization of drones. So it's not that member states won't have their say in the process, but that's to be seen. And we should not forget that the fact that we will have the regulation next year does not mean that it will apply as of next year. There will be a 2-year transitionary period within which member states will be required to adopt whatever they have in their national laws to the requirements of this new piece of legislation.
And are there any countries, I would imagine the Netherlands, that are favorable of an open drone airspace? I don't know, because I just guessed the Netherlands because they try to support e-commerce with Coolblue and things like that. They've changed parts of their social law to allow for the packaging market to be quicker and more efficient in support of e-commerce. I suppose that they also take the same position on drone delivery. Or am I just guessing wrong?
You're absolutely right. And in fact, that conference I was referring to was actually organized also by the representative of the Netherlands to the EU. So yes, they are very much in favor of this regime of a universal, uniform regime in the EU. As regards other states, I would say that France and Spain are taking very brave steps in this regard. And I was actually surprised because at the conference there was a representative of the Swiss Civil Aviation Authority, even though Switzerland is not in the EU, but they seem to be very open to enabling commercial operations of drones, and in a few months' time they will be testing a delivery network in Switzerland with drones. So that's quite innovative, and I would say I think there were some similar tests in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, but really the scale of the operation in Switzerland is impressive. So not so many. We still have states in the EU member states that have not adopted any legislation, and I assume that given the advanced stage of this proposal, they will rather wait than adopt legislation now. By the way, I think also it's an entirely personal opinion, not based on any facts, but I think that's also the reason why the Belgian legislator is waiting also for this new piece of law before amending the royal decree, because the royal decree has been heavily criticized for its prohibitive nature by the business associations. in Belgium, and but I think that they won't amend it before we see this new legislation.
Okay. So Ivo, so I would you've taped this, so if you can, it would be great if the tape actually worked, that we would have access, and that you publish it somewhere on YouTube or something, so we can link to it.
Sure, that would be great. The recording is still working, so I think it should be recorded also when I stop it.
Okay, and so I think we could close up here and try to do something with the leaflet or the ideas that we had with regards to how can you create awareness with the drone users. We can try to do it over here. I think the distance won't allow you to participate. But
yeah, it's a pity indeed, and I wanted really to be part of this because I find it quite a challenge to bring together people and actually think of how we can design such a thing. But I'd love to see the results if you come up with any results. So I hope that they will also be published.
All right.
Okay.
So on that note, thank you, Ivo. And well, Caroline is eating, so it's and perhaps see you next time in the flesh.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I wish you a nice jam session and also a very nice evening. And I hope to see you next time in person.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.